Hello and welcome back to the Wheel Knowers Formula One podcast. My name is Josh. I'm joined as always by Sam. We're back after a little bit of a break. I would say back and better than ever, but back and a little bit better than I think we were before we left in terms of F1. Sam, how was your break and how did you enjoy getting back to racing this weekend in Miami?
Yeah, I mean, I had a nice time over this break, but I was excited to get back to it. It's odd to have a break that long in the season outside of the summer break, and even that is getting shorter and shorter. So, yeah, to have two races and then immediately go on a 5 week break was definitely strange. I'm sure much stranger for the drivers and teams than for you and I, but still felt like a long time, and I'm excited to get back into it. I think with the best race of the year so far.
Yeah, I would agree. And some things changed over that break. Some things didn't. And that was Kimi Antonelli winning again in the main Grand Prix. Didn't win the sprint, but did win the Grand Prix on Sunday. He looked just as good as he did before the break. Seemed like the Mercedes were a little off the pace, the first couple days. First really day and a half in the sprint qualifying and FP1. And then in Grand Prix qualifying and the Grand Prix, it looked like business as usual so far this year for Kimi Antonelli. Is this real what we're seeing from Kimi? I mean, it almost seems like it's kind of like a fairy tale start to the season, to be honest. I was expecting good things, expecting some wins from Kimi this year, just with what we were thinking from the Mercedes, but this is, I think, way beyond what anyone expected at this point. Just doesn't feel real what he's doing right now.
Yeah, it's funny. I think after the first three races, actually not two, but after the first three races, we were talking about, we came on here a couple times and you were asking me if I was concerned for George. And, I definitely expected to start at the same place today. And I think I'm like halfway there. I mean, I know that, Kimi is the first topic of conversation. I mean, I think Kimi had a great weekend. I think, something that I really admired about his weekend is, we talked about having so much time to kind of hear all the praise and, maybe letting that get to your head, maybe coming in unfocused, not prepared, or just coming in and making some mental mistakes. But he was very solid all weekend long. I mean, I know that he gets beat out in the sprint, of course, by Norris, and sixth in the sprint, really not a great result, but he rebounds and comes back and wins the race and was, ended up looking convincing doing it, even though the rest of the field seemed to catch up a little bit this week. So I think it was a great weekend from Kimi. And yeah, I mean, I am a little bit concerned about George at this point. I'm not fully sounding the alarm. I'm going to wait till after Canada because it sounds like Mercedes have a lot more upgrades to bring there. And also just looking back at the history, Miami isn't George's best track, which is something that he said. He went out of his way to say that this weekend, that this isn't a place that really suits his eye. So I give him like half a pass, but it's still a disappointing weekend for him, to not finish on the podium with Kimi on the top step. And yeah, I think Kimi's really putting his foot down with weekends like this. And I think he's one or two more weekends like this away from me really feeling like he's on a path here to the World Championship.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said. I wasn't, like we had talked about, we weren't really feeling like it was like a real thing yet, just because you look at these first few tracks and historically they've been better for Kimi and worse for George. So we've been kind of factoring that in, and I still am to an extent, right? Like I want to see a bit more still, but it does feel a lot more real after this one to me, just because the on track gap is never been wider. And I know this isn't a great track for George. It's probably one of his worst on the schedule. But a 43-second gap between, first where Kimi finished and fourth where George finished. Not only that, George was 17 seconds behind Piastri in third. So it's not like he was, even really battling the McLarens all that much. He was very far off the pace, and Kimi was pretty far out ahead. So it felt really real this weekend, especially on Sunday. Just Kimi kind of taking control, and I know we still want to see more from the starts. The starts are still not good. Um, and even this start on Sunday wasn't his best, but he also got off the line. I mean, it was about equal to Max's start until you got to Max's spin. So if you're starting the same way that a four-time champion is, like it's not that bad, and we know the car is not set up for the starts like a Ferrari is. So you factor all that in. I don't think he's botching these starts to an extent, but there's only so much he can do as well. So yeah, you take all that into consideration. It feels really real to me. And you have Max, the four-time champion, starting alongside you on the front row. You got Lando Norris, the reigning champion, starting in third. And you go out and you just take control of the race after a bad start. You regain the lead, take control, and yeah, just a heck of a performance. And it's really what we've seen from Kimi all year. It's you go through this break expecting maybe something to be different, and it's kind of more of the same.
Yeah, exactly. It was more of the same. I mean, yeah, he certainly had some back and forths with Norris, even Leclerc a little bit at the beginning of the race. But I think this was just a great overall team effort. Antonelli did everything he could. Mercedes put him in great positions to succeed as well. He gets past Norris after their stops around lap 22, 23 in there. And from there, it wasn't necessarily easy, but, for the most part, he was not under threat. He got out a couple seconds ahead and kind of maintained at a point. So, yeah, I think this was just a fantastic weekend for Kimi, and a real statement to say, I'm not going anywhere. Wasn't just a fluke couple races at the start of the year, a couple wins for him to come back and say, like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be in this title fight till the end. It does send a message to George and to the rest of the paddock, to the likes of the McLaren and Ferrari guys who are hoping to get some upgrades and get back in that fight. That this might not be just a young guy who gets hot for a couple races. This guy might end up being a world champion.
Yeah, a world champion this year. I mean, I know we kind of all thought a world champion eventually, but I think the fact that it might happen this year is crazy. I know he has the car to do it, but you expect him not to going into the season because he's going up against a more experienced teammate, and a teammate that doesn't just have more experience, but is also a really fast driver himself, and world champion caliber driver. A lot of us thought as well, and he still might be. It's early on in the season. It's only a 20-point advantage in the championship. There's obviously a lot of racing left, but just the way he's been doing it has been very convincing. And not that we were really doubters in it, but it's early in the season. You don't know. You still don't really know, but kind of silencing a lot of people who might be kind of doubting this quick start to the season for him.
Yeah, no, I mean, I certainly was a doubter in the sense of him winning a title this year. And I'm far from counting George is out of it. I think he's got a real shot here. He's only 20 points back with about 20 races to go. So that is more than enough time. 19 or 18, sorry, I believe now with the 2 races out, but so much time to make up that ground. And we'll see kind of how this evolves and how things change after Canada. It sounds like Mercedes, they were talking about on the broadcast, bringing some upgrades that might bring another half a tenth of performance or 5/10, sorry, half a second of performance per lap. And if they do that, then they're way back out in front again. And this was kind of just fun for 1 week. So, if they do that, I think that helps Russell, these races like this, instead of being fourth, or he was even back in fifth or sixth at points, you end up a solid P2. Of course, it could help Antonelli as well, but yeah, I'm fascinated to see where it goes from here, and see if the hype is real behind those upgrades.
Yeah, if they gain another half a second with these upgrades per lap, I think we might just might just call it a day early on in the season. It was fun this weekend, McLaren getting back up there. And yeah, I was going to ask if McLaren are back, but based on, some of those insights on what their upgrades might bring for Mercedes, I don't know if we can say that. At least for this weekend, McLaren were kind of back. They brought some major upgrades to Miami. Lando wins the sprint, finishes P2 in the race. Oscar also finishes on the podium in the race as well, from a little bit further back in the field than where Lando started. So it was a really solid weekend for McLaren. It hadn't been their best stuff coming out of the gates so far. I mean, Oscar did pretty well in Japan to hold off the Mercedes for as long as he did. But still, he was never gonna really win that race, I don't think. Just with the overall pace that the Mercedes had. So McLaren definitely showed a pace improvement this weekend. And yeah, I think they're back in a sense, right? Like they're back being a real challenger for P2, I think. But if we'll see next weekend with the Mercedes upgrades, how real those are, and if those put them back out, even 0.3 of a second per lap, then it's a good upgrade and it's a good gain for McLaren, but it's not enough for them to be back in some sort of a title fight.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see how those Mercedes upgrades pan out, but I think at the very bare minimum, I think they're up to number 2 based on this weekend, and we'll see different tracks. Maybe Ferrari's still in there. Even Red Bull, I think, pace wise, was promising this weekend, even though they didn't maximize their points haul. So there is more competition in there, but I think McLaren looked fantastic this weekend. I mean, 2-3 in the race and 1-2 in the sprint. There's really not too much more you can ask for there, given what you're up against in Mercedes. So, yeah, I think McLaren are definitely back, at least in the sense that they're real competitors, and that I think they would be the favorites right now to come out at P2 in the constructors. They're 16 points behind Ferrari right now, but Ferrari really hasn't gotten any better since the start of the season. This weekend was really not great for them. Hamilton kind of get bogged down during the race, and Leclerc had his incident at the end, and yeah, it was just kind of a messy weekend for Ferrari. McLaren took advantage, and I think they're in a great spot now. Bare minimum P2 for the new expectations, and then we'll see what Mercedes brings. If the upgrades aren't what are promised, then I think McLaren could maybe not win the title, but I think they could at least maybe win a few races and kind of be consistently in the fight this year.
Yeah, the thing with McLaren is, they bring the upgrades, and they've been really good the past few seasons at bringing upgrades and showing major improvements with those and big gains. But it's not only the upgrades. I think, you look at with the Mercedes power that they have, them and all the other Mercedes customer teams, the non-actual Mercedes teams have been struggling so far this season, just kind of figuring out that Mercedes power unit. It was kind of contentious to start the year between the Mercedes power teams and Mercedes, of maybe they didn't, get all the help and the instructions on how the actual engine functioned and worked. And I think over this break, McLaren, along with the other Mercedes powered cars, you look at Alpine, they took a big step forward this weekend. I feel like kind of separated themselves for that 5th place in the constructors. Williams, I feel like they took a pretty decent step throughout the weekend. So I think, you're seeing those other Mercedes powered cars take a big step forward. And I think McLaren, along with their upgrades, just having more understanding of that Mercedes power unit, I think has really helped as well this weekend, kind of bring them back into the conversation.
Yeah, this was pointed out. I was watching the Sky broadcast when I did the full race watch through. They pointed out on there that 7 Mercedes power cars in the top 10. That's a great weekend for them. It's just Verstappen, Hamilton, and Leclerc, of course, mixing that up. But yeah, I mean, that Mercedes engine showing no signs of slowing down at the moment, and that does give McLaren a big advantage, I think, over Ferrari and Red Bull, at least. Going back to that P2 fight, I don't know if it's enough to overcome Mercedes, on a season long basis, but I think that that's a huge deal. With all the expertise that they have at McLaren, uh, all their technical expertise, plus that Mercedes engine, I think that's they're in for a good rest of the season. I will say this is a track that historically they've been very good at.
Mhm. Yeah.
Norris coming out party in 24, and then they went 1-2 last year here as well. But at the end of the day, this is a different car, a different kind of pecking order, and so yeah, I think it's all positives for McLaren this weekend, and they got a lot to look forward to with that engine and with their team. I think they're in a good spot.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that McLaren seem like they've figured out the starts a lot better than Mercedes, both having the same engine. And I don't know how McLaren kind of were able to figure that out and deal with that whatever limitation the Mercedes power have on those starts. McLaren seemed to have it, and Mercedes made the engine, and I don't know why they can't really figure out those starts yet, and McLaren can. That's definitely an interesting thing so far this year between all the Mercedes powered cars, just how different they've been at some things.
Yeah, it is kind of bizarre. I mean, it does make sense a little bit, especially when you look at the midfield teams, that they're not going to be quite on the same level, the Alpines and the Williams, that they might not be on the same level. But it is bizarre to see that difference in McLaren and Mercedes. I guess, different engineering teams, even with the same engine, different technical teams are going to come up with different solutions. So, yeah, in that sense, it does make sense, and it really doesn't matter that Mercedes have botched the starts as much as they have, because they built such a rocket ship everywhere else that they can just kind of sneak past and cruise. So, yeah, at the end of the day, not something to be too concerned about when you've won the first 4 races.
Yeah, where would we be right now if Mercedes had the starts figured out? I mean, I don't think a single race this year would have been very interesting, to be honest.
I know. Yeah, this one you might have got some fireworks with Max trying to hold off Russell from behind, but yeah, other than that, I think it would have been a pretty grim.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that first lap was crazy. It was pretty wild one. Kind of synchronized locking up from Verstappen and Antonelli there. It looked like they were the same exact car going into turn 1. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, good amount of lockups this weekend. I mean, our boy Lawson, of course, it sounds like it wasn't his fault, but
Couldn't have been his fault.
Torpedoing gas. He said there's apparently the gearbox went out or something, and so that's what led to the lockup. But there's a fair few lockups this weekend. I think maybe all the heat, even though it was a little cooler on race day, I guess a tough weekend probably on the tires.
Yeah, couldn't have been Lawson's fault. He's the GOAT. He'd never mess up. Speaking of other Mercedes-powered cars, Williams, I feel like they got a lot closer this weekend to kind of where we expected them at the start of the season. P9 and P10 finish. That's down at the bottom of the points, but still solid points in the midfield. Kind of, I feel like we expected them to maybe lead the midfield heading into the season. At least I kind of did. And Sainz kind of stating after being eliminated, and I think it was sprint qualifying, he felt like they were 3 steps behind really all weekend, but they looked much better as the weekend went on. And to get a P9, P10 finish, take some positive momentum into Canada coming up, I think is a really good sign for Williams. Don't want to see them, struggle and fall back to where they were a few years ago. It's been a lot more interesting when they've been up here fighting for points, and it seems like they made good progress this weekend with the time off on summer break.
Yeah, they did. I think they're kind of a sleeper winner of the weekend, even though it's obviously not where they wanted to be. If they're at least up at the top of the midfield again, I think that might be enough to kind of save vowels for now and save face. If you're Williams at the end of the day, being a P5, P6, if you're in that range, you can't really complain too much. So, this is a big weekend for them. Double points, and outside of Colapinto, who had a mega weekend, you're top of the midfield group, the F1.5 group, as they say. So, yeah, the huge weekend for Williams. Only 3 points, of course, but every point matters when you're down there. I mean, that brings them up ahead of Audi and obviously Cadillac and Aston as well. So they're still kind of a comfortable P8, 9 points behind Racing Bulls, but I think again a lot of season to go, and Mercedes powered team. I think they could very well leapfrog Racing Bulls and Haas if they can keep this momentum up. I don't think it's within the outside of the question at all.
You said might save Vowles a little bit. Is Vowles on the hot seat?
Well, I mean, I think it kind of has to be after all the promises of 2026 and we'll punt on 23, 24 and 25,
break everything.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying he should be fired right now or anything. I just think if they don't turn it around by the end of the year, I think people are going to be really asking questions to go from work your way up to P5 last year, which was a year ahead of schedule, and that's great. And then you end up back if they finished this year P8 or P9. I think I don't know. We'll see if that's enough to get him canned. I just think that people would be asking a lot of questions at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think you are as well, but I'm a big James Vowles guy, and I think that's all fair though. Like you said, he's promised for years that 2026 was what they've been working towards, and so far it's kind of been a dud if we're being honest. And it has been a dud from preseason. I mean, they didn't show up to the shakedown, just extremely overweight with the car, a lot of issues that they have had to work out so far. If they finish down, I think anything lower than P8 is a major failure this year, to be honest, with what they were hoping for heading into the season. You would have kind of expected P5, P6 probably at the worst with how they were talking up 2026. So yeah, anything lower than P8 would be kind of a disaster, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I was going to say, especially with Aston floundering, I think that was going to be the team that you looked at them most directly against, just two teams that were clearly building for this year and had high hopes for new regs. They've obviously gotten very lucky. We've talked about with the Aston's total disaster, but I think still, that's also to our point, another team that you're not really competing against anymore. And if you're still behind, like if you're behind Haas and Racing Bulls at the end of the year, two teams that aren't Mercedes powered, Haas famously not a big budget team, that playing Moneyball basically, and Racing Bulls, being a second team. If you're behind both those teams, as Williams, as a team that has the best engine and has gotten a lot more funding the last few years, sponsorships, all those kinds of things, he's done a great job with that. But I think there's going to be a lot of questions if you are still in this spot at the end of the year.
I know he's not the team principal anymore, but thinking of Gunter as Billy Bean, Moneyball is just that's a great picture in my head.
Yeah, I think let's see if I can find it. I think I saw a quote from Io the other day, Io Komatsu, the Haas team principal, that was basically like, there's no reason we should be up in P5 or P6 with our budget. Like it's, they're really playing outside of their league compared to the other compared to the Astons and Williams. And yeah, he said we shouldn't be fourth. We're the smallest F1 team, because they were fourth a race or two ago, and now of course they're fallen down to sixth. But yeah, I mean, that's really, that's the state of it right now. A lot of teams floundering, and even though they didn't get anything out of this weekend, Haas doing pretty well.
Yeah, it wasn't a stellar weekend for Haas, but it wasn't horrific either. But yeah, if just looking at those teams ahead, the B team for Red Bull should be ahead of them. I feel like as an independent team, Haas, smallest budget, should be ahead of them. If you're Williams and Alpine, I mean, Alpine's kind of a wild card where, like we were talking about, Williams and Aston Martin seemed like the two that were primed to pounce on these new regs and kind of make a push like Aston Martin did early on in the last reg set a little bit. And Alpine is the one who just kind of quietly behind the scenes worked, and it seems like they're kind of the prime of the midfield right now, and I don't think that's really going away. The pace definitely seems to be there really at pretty much every track we've gone to, and they got a good driver in Gasly, a driver in Colapinto. I'd like, still want to see a little bit more from Colapinto in a competitive car. We've only seen so much in his career, but from what I've seen when the car is competitive, he's been very solid as well. So yeah, I think Alpine's kind of the big winner of these of the midfield so far in this reg set, at least.
Yeah, they're absolutely the big winner. I mean, when you think about last year, the way that it ended and all the turmoil around the team, bringing in Briatore, a guy that controversial and, to come out on the other side looking to be the best in the midfield, even if they got a higher budget than a couple of teams and, more status in F1 due to their past as Renault and everything, it's still very impressive to turn this around that fast. Even in this new reg set to come out, you're miles better than Aston Martin. You're a good bit better than Audi, another team that we expected to make a leap and has been okay, but not amazing. You're ahead of Williams. So I think so far it's an A season for Alpine so far. I think they've crushed it, and if they can get a little more consistently out of Colapinto, I think they could have a really mega year. But obviously, this weekend was a great start towards that. Hopefully for Franco.
Yeah, it was not an A day for Ferrari on Sunday, really all weekend. Ferrari is kind of the big loser of the weekend, in my opinion. A lot of issues throughout the whole weekend, but Leclerc really, kind of summed it up. Tough last lap, and then gets slapped with 20 seconds of penalties after the race for, I think they said, leaving the track with for no, lack of a better term, because I'm not remembering the exact words, but for no reason, essentially. And yeah, just not a good weekend for Ferrari when you're expecting they're bringing about as many upgrades as McLaren did, I think, and it really didn't make that much of a difference. If anything, it's been by far the worst weekend they've had yet. Hamilton kind of seemed more like Hamilton of last year, where just not even really close to the pace. Leclerc at least somewhat on the pace, but just too many issues throughout the day. At one point was leading and finished as P8 behind Colapinto. So, not what you're looking for if you're Ferrari. Really tough day coming out of the break when kind of could have been, a bit of retaking the F1 world by storm and, possibly winning this weekend just with all the upgrades they brought to the car and Mercedes not bringing any.
Yeah, Hamilton kind of had an interesting weekend because he was 5/10 down to Leclerc in qualifying, which was not great. But then you look at the race, on the one hand, he does get some damage early on and loses a lot of downforce, and that kind of really hurts his pace. But on the other hand, he's out there scrapping with Colapinto. If you told me that at the start of the weekend, that would have been the scrap going down into the little cabana section there on lap one. That's not good news for Lewis. Yeah. They go wheel to wheel there. Colapinto gives him a little bit of damage. And then, it was kind of a nothing race from there for Hamilton. He was kind of hanging around that pack of Russell and Verstappen and Piastri, but never really a threat. Had a little scrap with Max, but that was it. And then Leclerc, just a disaster weekend, partially his fault and partially the team's fault. I think, he comes out behind Russell after that set of stops, and then he's asking over the radio, Ferrari, like, hey, why did we stop there? What's going on? And they just don't answer him, I guess. The broadcast at least made it seem like that. I wasn't listening to the team radio, but what they played on the broadcast, and they said he never answered. So I guess they just didn't bother telling him why they stopped there. And then, he loses some time in traffic after that. Hamilton also didn't have a great stop right after that. Like, it was just, just a rough weekend for them. And then, of course, that Leclerc spin at the end, really loses him some time, and ends up all the way back in P8 after that penalty and the spin, and just a total mess. um, a mess of a Sunday for them, even though that never really seemed like they had the pace to be on the podium this week with Mercedes and McLaren. They still should have gotten more out of this, should have been ahead of Verstappen after his spin and mess at the start, and definitely ahead of Colapinto. So, yeah, left some points on the table for sure.
Yeah, back to your point about Hamilton. Yeah, he did get the damage with the battle with Colapinto, right? But he shouldn't be battling with Colapinto in the first place. Like that, I think that's the whole thing. Is he was 5/10 off Leclerc in qualifying, and that puts you back in the pack where it's more, you're more prone to get run into somebody and have a little bit of damage from that. So maybe he could have finished a position higher, maybe ahead of Max in the race if he doesn't have that damage. But I don't think it was going to have a major effect on his weekend. Just with the pace we had seen even before that, just wasn't very good. And he was so racy those first few races. I was really excited. I thought, we were on to something here, and maybe we still are. It could just been one bad weekend, but it just felt like it was kind of Hamilton from last year this weekend, and we don't want to see that.
It did, yeah. He just felt a little bit off. It was also bizarre. I guess I was looking at Q1 times. By the way, he was 2/10 off, not 5/10.
Still,
But yeah, that still does put him behind Leclerc, Norris, and Russell there. Not a great qualifying. Regardless, it was kind of a bizarre weekend for him. He comes in. I'm not going to criticize the guy's effort too much because he's a 7-time world champ and everything, but he comes in after the whole world seen him at Coachella and seen him, all over the all over the world basically. And he says, yeah, I've been in the factory grinding, working hard, and I don't doubt that he's working hard on some level. There's just an optics thing there where it's like, when you're already off the pace, when you're a 7-time world champion, and it just something seems off there. And, there's just, not great looks in the Ferrari team right now as a whole.
Could be the Kardashian curse.
Yeah.
That's been a thing in basketball, right? Wasn't it for I forget who was dating who,
I think it's been a thing in everything basically. Yeah.
Not good.
Yeah.
Not good. Yeah. Just I've seen the Instagram posts. I've seen Lewis in the gym just hustling, working out, grinding.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
He's been doing something.
He always posts when he's on the jog and in the gym.
Yeah. Gotta let everyone know.
Mm-hmm.
He's still on the grind. Another team that had a lot of issues this weekend was Audi. Felt like it was a decent start to the year for them. Not getting the greatest launches off the line so far this year, but their raw pace in qualifying and in the race has been really solid so far this year. But this weekend, just things really did not go this way in their way. Multiple issues with the car. The pace just wasn't quite as quick as we've seen so far this year, even when the car was running properly. And just kind of a nightmare weekend from Audi that maybe we would have expected like the first race or two when they're still getting their feet under them. But so far, other than the starts this year, they've seemed like a really professional outfit. They've seemed very, very just in tune with everything. But this is the first weekend where things kind of seemed a little bit off the rails. Maybe the brights were a little, or the lights were a little too bright in Miami for Audi. Maybe that was it.
Yeah, they must have been. I mean, we saw issues with both cars. We saw, DQs. We saw engines blowing up basically. It was just overall just a total mess. And, it's really unfortunate. I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, kind of, this is a team that we expected a lot more of. we thought that these guys would be top of the midfield potentially. It maybe take a little bit longer than we thought, but yeah, just not a great weekend. Not a good look. I mean, Bortoleto at least was kind of competitive in the race, middle of the midfield, basically sandwiched between the Haas's. But yeah, I mean, now they're down to P9. They're basically last in the teams that are actually competitive championship. No offense to our boys Cadillac and Aston, but yeah, I mean, they're last in the like fielding normal cars championship basically. So yeah, disappointing weekend, disappointing season so far.
They should have a separate championship for Cadillac and Aston Martin, like multi-class racing, like we're in WEC or IMSA or something.
Yeah, F 1.75 or something.
I think it's just F2 at this point. I mean, did you see the Aston Martin qualifying thing?
I was just about to say the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, there Alonso's time was worse than the worst F2 time in qualifying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's grim. It's real grim.
I know that wasn't like a real lap Fernando put down. It was like 12 seconds off. So it either had a huge mistake or like they're not actually 12 seconds off the pace, but that was jarring to see that when that was put out there that they were slower than the F2 cars. Not good.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading right before he went on. There's this article about Alonso, and he says basically he's at peace right now because he knows that things aren't changing. I guess they're not bringing any big upgrades until after summer break. So
after summer break?
Yeah. So he's like, yeah, I'm just gonna keep answering the same questions every week about how bad this is going, and what are the expectations, and just the same things over and over again. And yeah, it's real grim.
Truly a GP2 engine situation for Fernando being compared to the F2 times.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not good. Not good at all. Yeah. Well, back to Audi. Kind of got sidetracked there with some Aston talk, but I just think it's like I've been really impressed with them so far this year, just how they've come out of the gates. And it just feels like this race was kind of like a step back for them, but also kind of where you would have expected them to be, like from the jump. So it's kind of a weird situation with them where it's like if this was race one, I wouldn't be that worried at all because I'd be like, oh, they're whole new team, obviously taking over from Sauber, but so they had some of that infrastructure there, but a whole new team, and the big thing too, building their own engines. I thought it might take some time for them to get that right, but they came out of the gates pretty strong in the first three races where they looked decently competitive, like I said, barring the race starts. And then for them to come out and have the reliability problems that they had this weekend, along with the pace just kind of not really being where it's been so far this year, has been felt like a step back to where I would have expected them to be. So yeah, definitely not a good sign, but also one where it's kind of like, well, yeah, they're pretty much a whole new team. So, it's not too surprising to see them have these issues and have some weekends where it's definitely just not all clicking.
Yeah, it wasn't all clicking this weekend. I mean, we'll see kind of how this evolves throughout the year. We've talked about the resources that they have, potentially a team that could bring some upgrades and shoot up the order pretty quickly. But yeah, just one of those weekends. I mean, every team has them, I guess. We saw this early on with McLaren struggling to get cars to start the race, and Red Bull's had their issues plenty this season so far. We just talked about a bad weekend for Ferrari. So yeah, it's not great, but we'll see. I think it's certainly like a disappointment so far this season. but it's not like a fire everybody mode or anything. I
Mhm.
think, especially with all the turmoil that they've had at their team with Wheatley leaving and everything, it seems like a bit of a mess there.
Yeah, that is the one thing where you can't fire everybody anyways, because a lot of them have already left. But it is weird. Like you start the season where I was saying they seemed very like professional, and everyone was kind of doing what you would expect like a team that's been on the grid for a few years to be doing. But also they've had this kind of turmoil in the background where they've had uh a lot of not firings, but a lot of people going separate ways, and a lot of cycling through of guys in management. And it's been I think that can't be understated for the effect that that's probably had on the team so far this year as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for a new team, a team that's obviously building on something previous with the stake kick, Sauber, etc. era, they did have something to build on, but you're trying to rebuild this team sort of into a new image, trying to kind of ditch that past era where they were a back marker and just the team with the bright green cars, and build them into a champion, or at least a competitive outfit. And so that's going to take some time. And when you lose so much in the leadership category and there's so much turmoil early on, it's certainly not a great start. I don't doubt Audi long term, but it's going to take a little while longer, I think, than maybe we suspected with all this turmoil going on.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Let's get to some talk on the regulations. Last time out we were pretty down on the regs. Kind of a down episode, to be honest. But we come to Miami. They've made some adjustments to the regulations, and to me, it seemed better, but it's still not where it needs to be. And I don't know if it ever will under these like this set of regs, unless there's drastic changes to them. Um, but this, at least this weekend, it wasn't like an embarrassment, right? Like to watch, like it didn't seem, and maybe it's just because we're comparing it to what happened the first three races, but didn't really seem as gimmicky. Um, Guys were able to attack a little bit more. Qualifying was much better in my opinion. All of this is through the lens of it's still not great, right? But you're comparing it to what it was before when we're talking about any of these improvements. So yeah, I think it was better. Instead of losing like 50 kph on the straights, they were losing like 20 at the end of that back long straight there in Miami. So yeah, you obviously don't want to be losing any miles per hour or kilometers per hour on the straights. But it's better, and I think we have to call that out as a step in the right direction as well. But also keep pushing for ultimately what we should have as fans of what's known to a lot of people as the pinnacle of motorsport.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a start. That's
Mhm.
kind of what we were looking for. Is we knew it was going to be too much probably to fully transform these regulations, even with this 5 weeks off. That's just not enough time to totally transform this into something new and rebuild these regs exactly how all the fans want them. So I think it was a good start. I mean, obviously a very entertaining race. Some of
Mhm.
that probably due to reg changes. Some of it might have happened anyways. But at the end of the day, I think they've done well here as a start.
Mhm.
We'll see how that evolves. We'll see. You look at the likes of Monza and Vegas and Baku later in the year. Those sessions could still look pretty rough. Going down those longer straights. Miami not a track with a lot of very long straights or anything. I guess that one after the chicane is kind of long. Um,
Mhm.
but it's not a Vegas or a
Yeah.
Baku or anything. So we'll see how that changes. But I think it was a solid step in the right direction. And I think F1 got a lot of positive PR out of
Mhm.
this weekend, that it was such an entertaining race at a track like Miami that we enjoy going, but historically has not delivered as a peak F1 track,
Mhm.
to say. It's been, sort of middling to lower tier, I would say. And this weekend was very solid. So a big step this weekend for Miami and a big step for F1, I think, in the right direction.
Yeah, like you said, all we could hope for is a step towards the ultimate goal. And over the break, there were some times where it seemed like it was not going to be like the future was not going to be very good in terms of these reg sets, where you had some of the higher ups at F1 and at the FAA pretty much saying that there's not really any issues with what is currently the racing currently and the cars currently, and that had me really concerned that the changes weren't really going to do much of anything at all. And yeah, they still didn't, they still weren't miles better, but they were better. So that eased my concerns a little bit, because I was getting very concerned with some of the things I was hearing over the break. Some from Domenicali, I think, in particular, that pretty much saying that there wasn't really anything that needed to be adjusted other than like some of the safety stuff. And yes, that is very important, but from the racing perspective, it had me worried. But some of this stuff was put my mind at ease a little bit this weekend from what we saw, because it was a lot better than what we'd seen in the first three races, for sure.
Yeah, it absolutely was. I think it was, it's baby steps, I guess, but this was a very solid first step in a long process. And by the end of the year, I think we're going to be in a better place, which is something that I've thought all along. But I think there have been moments where you start to get a little worried. F1 sometimes great at taking action on things like this when it affects the product enough, and other times too slow. So I think so far they're off to a good start in reforming this. They caught a bit of a break, with all the time off, but now they're off to a good start, and I think it'll continue to get better as the season progresses.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the fact that you didn't have at least a lot of the public after the race that I saw, some of the public, discourse online wasn't as bad as it has been the first three races. To me, I think that's definitely a good sign for F1, and a good step in the right direction, for sure. And another thing that's got me feeling a lot better about the future is they pretty much confirmed that it's weird because they were saying 2031, but then they also said 2030 when they said it. So it's a little bit confusing, but they said that the V8s are pretty much like guaranteed coming back in that 2030 or 2031 season, with very minimal electric components to the engine, which is a really good thing in my opinion. It's a great step, and something that's really good to hear, that at least they are listening to the fans a little bit on some of this stuff. And yes, it's going to take time, but knowing that that's in the future as well for F1, I think is a good thing for a lot of the fans too, to kind of know that there is some light at the end of the tunnel of these regs. However they turn out in 3 or 4 years time, they might be pretty solid by the time we get to the end of this. But no matter what, I think the V8 is going to be much more well received from the public.
Yeah, and, I think there's a lot of distrust from the fans right now of F1, and deservedly so. They've made their mistakes over the years, and their leadership isn't always the most sound. But I do think that this, I think it's much harder to have the level of mistakes that we've had this past year, under a V8 system. I think will be it'll be an easier, not an easy transition for the teams going from the system we have now. It's teams like Audi and Cadillac and such are going to have to kind of reshift their thinking when it comes to building these new engines, and it's going to be a lot for them. But I think for most teams, it'll be an easier switch than this reg set was, and I think that it might get some pushback, between now and then. But by the time we get there, most fans and drivers, I think, will be happy to see the V8s and be out of this era of Formula One.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, and I agree because I think the V8s, especially like you look at a guy like Max, right? I think knowing that something like the V8s are coming is going to be very good in keeping him around as well. And the other thing is, I know some of the OEMs have been kind of pushing for how we got here with the higher electrical component because of hybrid sales and all that around the world of road cars. But they said that they don't really need the engine manufacturers support in this when they go to the V8s in 2030 2031, that the FIA and F1 will have enough power by then to push it through regardless. So I think that's a really good thing as well. I know that was a big reason for Audi joining was the hybrid components. So I don't know exactly what happens there. I imagine that they'll stay around. But yeah, I think that it can't be understated how important bringing the V8s in is going to be, not only for the fans but for the drivers and ultimately for the teams as well, whether they were for more of a hybrid system or not. I think once we get closer to the V8 kind of era, I think that'll be something that will be that the manufacturers will be looking forward to by that point.
Yeah, of course. And there's still a lot to be figured out. These are just preliminary ideas, I guess. There's a lot to be figured out as to what's going to carry over and what's not. I just think that a lot of the drivers will be happy to see this change, given what they've said about this current era of Formula One, and this new 50-50 system. I think is just not working for a lot of guys. So we'll see. It could be a thing that brings back a guy like Max if he does leave. It could entice some guys to stay on the grid, and we'll see what that looks like in a few years.
Yeah. The other thing about the current regs and bringing in the V8s and all of that, I was watching the race with a friend who doesn't really follow F1 that much, kind of knows the general the general bits of it, but doesn't really watch race to race. And he had this will tell you the level of knowledge. I was pointing out the Cadillac cars and stuff, and he was like, "Oh, I forgot Cadillac was involved this year, so I got to start racing, or I got to start watching." And I was like, honestly, I would wait till 2030 or 2031 for the V8s to come back, because it's going to be better by then. So I think that just kind of tells you where we're at, right? Because I love F1, and I want as many people to watch it as possible, and to even tell someone who isn't watching currently, like, hey, I would wait 3 or 4 years to start watching, is I think that kind of shows where we're at, but it also shows what the V8s might bring, because he seemed pretty excited whenever I mentioned that part too. So I think it's kind of just shows a little bit about where we're at and where we're going for F1.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a long time to wait. I understand your thinking there, but maybe try again at the end of the season or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I understand where you're at. A lot of people, I think, feel the same way. And maybe some more weekends like this past weekend will start to change the minds, and we'll start to see some more buy-in again. But yeah, there's a lot of diehard fans that were diehard fans that are, either given up totally, or maybe they're kind of in and out depending on the weekend. And that's just kind of where we're at right now, unfortunately, with the sports. So hopefully that gets better sooner than 2030 or 31. But
Yeah.
Who knows at this point?
Yeah. Well, if Cadillac start winning, I'm going to tell them to tune it on immediately.
Yeah.
So do we want to go to Cadillac Corner, or do we want to do personal podiums first?
We can go ahead and do. You got podiums first here in the dock, so we could just go ahead and do that.
All right, let's get to podiums. In my personal podium, P1 for Miami, I had Lando Norris, actually. Not Kimi Antonelli this time. Had him the past 2 times, but needed to go a little bit different here. And I think, Lando was pretty deserving of it as well. Obviously, winning the sprint, a very huge leap for McLaren this weekend and for Lando as well. But also, what he did in the race, only finishing 3 seconds behind Kimi, who and Mercedes, who have been dominant in every race this year. He definitely held his own in the Grand Prix, so I think that has to be shouted out. Also finished 24 or so seconds ahead of his teammate, so definitely a really solid weekend for Lando. I have him P1 on my personal podium. P2, I have Kimi. Another win has to be on the podium somewhere. Like you said, the sprint wasn't great, but did really well in qualifying in the Grand Prix. Really proper drive from him. So I had him P2. And in P3, I had Franco Colapinto, finishing P7 in the Alpine. Touched on Alpine a little bit before. They've definitely taken a step in the right direction with these regs. And this weekend, I think, was a pretty big leap for Colapinto, too. He was right around Gasly, all weekend. Obviously finished well ahead when Gasly was knocked out of the race early on. But he was, right there with Gasly or a little bit ahead all weekend. And, we rate Gasly pretty high as a driver. So really solid weekend for Colapinto, and he rounds out my personal podium in P3.
Yeah, so I've gone similar but slightly different. I went ahead and had Kimi P1. A lot of that was because, like I said at the start, it's just as much about the statement as it is about the physical driving. On a weekend where George doesn't even get on the podium to come out and win the race and be, he's about 0.3 a lap, or I guess 3/4 of a second ahead per lap, by the end of the race. Just really, really sensational stuff from Kimi. I think he has to be P1. Lando, obviously a good shout as well. A couple other guys had very nice weekends, but for me, I've got him P1 just because of what it means in the championship and how well he drove all weekend, especially on Sunday. My P2, I've gone with Lando. A lot of the same reasons you said. I thought, he really maximized this weekend, was ahead of Piastri pretty much the whole weekend. And now he looks like a guy, if Mercedes, this next round of upgrades doesn't pan out, he looks like a guy that's going to be a threat week in, week out once again. And I thought it was encouraging too. I know he was very frustrated after finishing P2. I think that was, even though some people might, think he was attacking the team, or, some people might read that the wrong way. I think it was encouraging to see, that's a guy that we think of as more relaxed and laid back. And especially after he's won a title, you think maybe, it's all fun and games this year, but he's clearly locked in and motivated to win, especially on a weekend like this where you have a car that's capable potentially of doing so. So encouraging weekend for Norris, even though I'm P2. And then I've also gone Colapinto P3, finishing ahead of Gasly in both qualifyings and the race. Of course, like you mentioned, Gasly goes out early, but regardless, I mean, a P7 for Colapinto, you're never going to complain about that. Just a really, really solid weekend, and a guy who really needed it. We've talked a lot about him as a guy who came in hot, and then last year was kind of disappointing when he got into that Alpine. Obviously a tough spot with the car performance, and also coming in late after the Doohan dropping, but still just a guy that really needed a good weekend. And I think this weekend he did pretty much everything he could and really lived up to the talent that he could be. So I've got him P3, and this is really encouraging for him keeping his seat straight off of this, and if off his exhibition in Buenos Aires, when it sounds like the entire city came out to watch him do donuts or whatever, it's a big moment for Colapinto these last few weeks.
Alpine midfield dominance may bore fans. I think that's what we've learned from this weekend.
Yeah, P5 dominance.
Yeah, they shout out to them. I've been a Alpine watcher, as we've said, for quite some time now. Just waiting in the weeds, just keeping my eye on them, and I got nothing negative to say right now. So I think that shows you where we're at with Alpine. Stinker of the week. Now I have gone sadly for Charles Leclerc. Just felt like, kind of could have been a Ferrari as a whole thing, but Leclerc specifically, kind of for that last lap and, ultimately dropping all those places when you had the penalty as well. But just felt like it was kind of their weekend to go out and take it, and maybe, have Mercedes a little bit worried about, the future of this championship, and just didn't see it from Leclerc or Hamilton. But more specifically, I think Leclerc's final lap there just takes it over the edge for him. So I have Leclerc as stinker of the week.
It's funny, as I thought this week was a week where we had a few contenders for stinker of the week, and I still didn't have Charles up there. I mean, I don't think it's a bad shout. He did throw away some opportunities in this race. Just wasn't the first guy that came to mind. I think maybe just because it was a last lap incident, it doesn't. Anyways, I went ahead and went with Audi here. Just with all of their troubles throughout the weekend, struggling to keep cars on track. Hulkenberg having multiple instances struggling with his car, and then Bortoleto DQ'd as well in the sprint for his car. Everything just a total mess. And we already kind of did our Audi dialogue, so I'll save most of it, but a disappointing weekend. And the other guy I almost went with was Isaac Hadjar, who it gets a bit of a bad rap because he got DQ'd from qualifying over something that was the team's doing, not his own. But he was also well behind Max pace wise all weekend, which we expect to some degree, but was a little more than we expected, and then makes a bad mistake. Certainly an easy mistake to make. If I got on a sim right now, I'd do that lap one. But it's still in F1. That's a tough mistake to make, and it was a kind of a disaster weekend for Isaac as well. Max really starting to pull away once again from his teammate.
I think if your only goal was to not hit that wall in that corner, I think you could do it. And you could go as slow as you want.
I was going to say I'd probably miss that and then hit the barrier on the other side going through the chicane or something.
Run over that little piece that Max ran over.
Yeah.
A couple years ago or last year.
Yeah, that's true. I remember when we went a couple years ago, we were sitting in that section and we heard Gasly bend it back there, and we could hear the thud against the wall. Yeah, I thought about that when I saw where Isaac went off.
But, yeah, that was tough.
Yeah, we would have got to see the Hamilton Colapinto scrap this year. It's unfortunate.
Darn.
Yeah.
F1, lower your prices and we'll go.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, let's get to Cadillac Corner then. My big takeaway, got closer, but still a long way to go for Cadillac. Feels like in sprint qualifying, it was pretty good signs for Perez at least. He only got one lap, but was only I think 0.3 off from advancing to SQ2. And then the sprint race, it felt like in both the sprint race and the actual Grand Prix on Sunday, it felt like the first half of a stint, the Cadillacs could contend. And then I don't know if their tire DEG is just like really awful or what exactly is going on, but it seems like about halfway through the stint they really fall off and fall way behind. You'll look like a few laps in, 10 laps into either a restart or an actual race start, and you'll be like, oh, they're only a second or two off the whoever's ahead. Like, I feel encouraged here, and then it just falls off a cliff. Especially for Bottas. I don't know what Bottas was doing in the Grand Prix on Sunday, but I think he was like 50 seconds behind Stroll or something at one point. And maybe they I'm honestly not sure because I wasn't, I was kind of watching it when I was out, so I wasn't able to look at like, the onboards or anything. So maybe they were just pitting Bottas like a bunch, just trying out a bunch of different things. But the pace was concerning for Bottas. I mean, it wasn't great for Perez, like when you got to the second half of those stints, but it was really bad for Bottas. And I don't know, maybe just a bad track. Maybe there was some big damage to the car, but it was not good. Not good for Bottas.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know if I go as far as to say it was a disappointment this weekend because we're still kind of at a training wheels phase, but I certainly I was under no assumption that these upgrades were going to bring Cadillac up to the top of the midfield or the points or anything like that, but I was hoping for a little bit more pace wise. I mean, they still are kind of back with the Astons and well behind everyone else. And so, I think, at the end of the day, Perez wasn't bad, did what he could. He did scrap with some guys and, not even just the Astons. He was up in there a little bit. I think he was up to 13th at one point, and I got a little bit excited, but ends up back in 16th. So, I mean, there was a couple of decent moments, but at the end of the day, not quite a massive amount of movement from Cadillac this weekend. We'll see how that progresses over the year, but not a hugely successful weekend for Cadillac in the first home race.
Well, that's the thing is why I felt like, getting closer, but just still a ways off was kind of to sum up the weekend, because there were times, like I said, in sprint qualifying where it seemed like Perez was decently close. There were times in the race, in both races, where it felt like they were not, horrendously off in terms of pace. But then you look at the result at the end of both the sprint and the Grand Prix, and they weren't really close to anyone but the Aston Martins. So that was the part where it seemed like it was better at certain points, but the result, obviously, and like you mentioned, we're not expecting them to have jolted up to P10 right in this race and get points, but just being a little bit closer to whatever the Racing Bulls were not great this weekend on pace, being around them or maybe around Audi in pace because they were not great this weekend as well. Just being close enough to where it's like, you're a threat to those guys, I think would have been a little bit better. But there were times when it did seem a little bit better. So tricky one to figure out for Cadillac after this weekend, but I think, you can only go up from here. So
that is the truth. I mean, I guess technically Perez did finish ahead of Stroll. So, but
the reliability is still there. I mean,
that is true.
Shout out that.
Yeah, there's much more room to go up than there is down to improve. So, I mean, I'm looking at the race pace right now. They're about a second behind Lindblad per lap. Perez was. So,
and that's about where they were kind of before the break.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
dang,
hate to see that
stagnation. Yeah,
hate to see that.
Yeah,
just expecting like one of those random upgrades. Obviously, not actually expecting, but just hoping for one of those. Like when McLaren brought that upgrade like halfway through 23, I think, and just like shot up the standings and out of nowhere was like battling Max for wins. Obviously not to that extent, but just like maybe they just unlock something out of nowhere and it's like, whoa, like Perez just qualified like P12.
Yeah, I was gonna
Something like
say.
that.
I was gonna say if they were top of the mid, like if they were up there with Alpine and Williams, I'd be through the roof. I'd be thrilled.
Be celebrating in the streets,
Yeah, parades.
grown men crying for joy. I was a little disappointed. I know there was a Cadillac grandstand down there, but I never saw it on the broadcast or anything. So,
Well, I saw it. I think it was the Turn 1 grandstand had like the Cadillac branding on it,
so
but
maybe
I
it was,
don't know if that.
yeah.
I don't know if that was the Cadillac grandstand or not. I think I just saw like the
I think it was around
Cadillac.
turn 1.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be. So, speaking
Yeah.
of grandstands, I don't know if they've had this the past few years, and maybe I've just completely missed it. But that cruise ship grandstand,
Yeah.
was that new this year? Because
I
that
think
looked,
that
that
was.
was sick.
I think that was new. That and there was like this wood structure by like on the front straight that I didn't
Yeah,
notice from before either. But yeah, I think the cruise ship thing was new.
that was pretty sick. You know, the
Yeah.
fake marina is kind of is pretty lame, but the fake cruise ships grandstand that was kind of sick.
Yeah, I mean, there's always some theatrics in Miami. I
Yeah,
did enjoy tuning in for Brundle's grid walk this week.
Jimmy
Was,
Fallon just decided to eat the microphone for some reason.
yeah, Jimmy Fallon went crazy. DJ Khaled went crazy. Colin Farrell was reliving the glory days 30 years ago, going to his first race. It was a great time, and Brundle's fit was insane.
It was great.
In the
It was
best
really
way.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
They cut to the garage one time. It wasn't during the race. It was one of the qualifyings, I think. And it was Jimmy Fallon and Bam Adebayo standing right next to each other. And they just zoomed in on Jimmy Fallon and like put his name up on the bottom, and it just like cut Bam out of the shot completely.
Yeah,
That was really great.
I think Bam was like the first celebrity that he interviewed on the grid, and I was like, that must have been an easy one to pick out.
Yeah.
Because he was like, well, all these guys. At one point, he's like, I'm sorry if there's famous people that I'm skipping by. I don't know everybody.
Yeah.
Because there's but
Yeah.
Bam being 7 foot tall, it's not too bad to pick out.
Yeah. I tell you what, you can hate Miami, but it does give some great just cultural F1 moments.
Yeah, I mean, if the racing is this good every year, I'm all for it because you get the theatrics, which I know not everyone loves, but it can be interesting sometimes. And then
I don't. Yeah, like if it's taking away from the actual racing, it stinks. But like it's some of it's just funny, so you know you can enjoy it. Like the grid walk stuff is hilarious to me. So
yeah, and I mean, the celebrities can be kind of give or take, but as long as they're interested in the race and happy to be there and everything, I don't really mind it that much. So they also had Nadal waving the checkered flag. That was huge. Yeah.
The best is when the celebs are in on the bit with Brundle. That's always
Yeah, I feel like someone told Fallon about Brundle like 5 minutes before the grid walk.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, Brundle, I've been waiting forever. I'm so glad to meet you."
Yeah.
With the whole bit.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
It's great. Well, I think that's everything for Miami. We'll be back in a couple weeks for Canada. Any parting thoughts from you, Sam, after Miami?
I mean, just excited. I think, a lot of positives to come out of this weekend. We saw a better racing. Some of the teams tighten up. Like I said, we'll see after Canada if that changes. But at the moment, I think the vibes are back up a little bit. And I'm excited for the summer. I know we got another couple week break here before another race. But I think after Canada, everything really starts to heat up. So I'm excited to see what the summer turns into, see if anybody can take the fight to Mercedes, and see how the midfield and the back markers, how all that changes as we get further into these regs.
Yeah. It's I think, we were really down at the end of last episode before the break, but I think we're definitely not back, but we're a little closer. So it's been good to see so far from Miami.
Absolutely.
Well, that's everything from this episode. We'll be back, like I said, in a couple weeks for Canada, and we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.